I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, Naturopathic Doctor. Welcome to another episode of Women's Health Unplugged. We are being joined today by a good friend of mine and a guest that we've had on the podcast before, Dr. Jen Salib-Huber. Hi, Jen.
Hi. Thanks for having me again, Jordan.
I'm so excited for us to dive in on this conversation, Jen. Anytime you and I get on a mic together, I've been on your podcast a couple times, and this is now the second time you've been on my podcast. We literally talk for like 30 minutes before we hit record because we have so much to say. We have so much in common. And then we're like, oh yeah, we're here because we're recording a podcast. So I'm excited for us to dive in. We touched on this topic a little bit some time ago. It's actually been more than a year since you joined us on the podcast. We're going to talk about body image. We're going to talk about an undiet culture in women in midlife, which really, to me, when I think of you, these are the things that I think about as being your domain expertise. But for our listeners who don't know you or haven't listened to our first episode, which now they should go back and listen to, can you introduce yourself for my audience and share how you got yourself into this space of being such a ambassador for women in midlife?
Yeah, I'd love to. I need to find a way to do this like succinctly. I can't even say that word, like to do this like in a condensed way, because I feel like it's a long story, but it's also not. So the long, short version is that, like so many people, I started my first diet at 12 and went into nutrition and naturopathic medicine because I was looking for ways to kind of support, fix myself, whatever, with food and nutrition, and became an ND and had a very general practice, I think, for about 10 years. Until I crash landed into perimenopause. And at the same time, so many people in my practice were kind of going through that age and phase. And it really became clear to me about 7 or 8 years ago that the way we were doing things, which was, food is medicine, calories in, calories out, trying to find the latest hack for your metabolism, just wasn't serving us. And even if it was resulting in weight loss, it wasn't helping women to feel better. And it certainly wasn't helping me to feel better. And so that was kind of the beginning of my personal and professional undieting journey. And for probably about the last 4 or 5 years, I've been really focused on helping, kind of women in all stages of midlife just kind of undiet, meaning unlearn what they think they know about food and nutrition and health. And so that they can build up a relationship with food that, feels easier and just kind of more joyful and more sustainable. So was that short? It felt long, but I think it was short.
That was short. And, you brought up, I like that you defined I love that you defined that sort of undiet piece for us, because I think one of the challenges we have in nutrition and women's health and weight management and whatnot is that we always take this sort of polar stance about everything, right? And so when you say the word undiet, the entire dieting industry goes, oh, so you're just going to throw in the towel and give up on life, right?
Yes.
Rather than acknowledging like that, actually, like there is this like in between land that you can live in where we eat well, we have peace with food. Like it doesn't mean that you eat cookies for breakfast unless you want to.
Yeah. I mean, and this is absolutely the thing, because but I'll say that there's nothing wrong with eating cookies for breakfast once in a while too, right? You wouldn't feel good if you did that every day, but neither are you like breaking some kind of like moral or legal law if you do. And so this undiet concept, I prefer to the language of anti-diet, although I'm very anti-diet as well. But anti-diet to me feels like we're putting up a barrier. And it doesn't feel like it's an unlearning. So I think that there's a bigger picture of the anti-dieting movement, which is kind of coming out against when wellness culture, diet culture, influencers who are giving advice when they shouldn't be, versus the undieting process, which I think is a bit more personal, which is, okay, let's go back and figure out when you first started feeling a little bit mixed up about food. When did you first start wondering, should I be eating this? Or maybe you felt judged by food, or maybe you all of a sudden became, aware of the diet culture within your family and how people talked about food and their bodies. And so for many people, it isn't like a single event. Some people do have that, but some people do remember seeing uncle or aunt so-and-so for the first time in 2 years, and they commented on their body and that sent them down the dieting spiral. But for most people, it's like this series of little events that happen that all of a sudden you notice the people in your life who are not having dessert, who are eating their burger without the bun, who are saying no to the croutons, who are like dipping their fork in the salad dressing before eating their salad. It's like all of these little things that you start to notice and pick up on, and they become part of what you think you need to do to be healthy. It becomes part of what you think is required as someone who cares about health, that you order your dressing on the side. It's like this default programming. When in fact, none of those things have any evidence for supporting health or nutrition. And because the rules change, because the game changes all the time, depending on what game you're playing, we can all be playing soccer or football, depending on what side of the pond you live on. But if the rules are changing and you never know, whether you're going to be playing with 9 players or 11 players or how many balls are in play, it becomes really confusing. And so what I see are women who get to midlife who are more interested in food for the right reasons, meaning they're starting to really think about, okay, I need to think about food and want to think about food from a health perspective, but they have 10, 20, 30 years of dieting baggage, and they literally don't even know what to think about food anymore. They wake up and they're like, I wake up and I'm keto, and I end the day and I'm like high carb, low fat, because the rules just get so mixed up. And so it's kind of like the latest analogy that I use. It's like, it's when my browser crashes and like my 18,000 windows get closed for me, and I have to start open with a new browser window and reopen things with intention. It's the exact same thing that happens with undieting. You just have to let it all go, but then hopefully with some support can actually build and add back in the things that feel good, that are actually have value to your life.
So let's talk about body image first for a second, because I think that I don't know which is the chicken or which is the egg, honestly, in this conversation, right? Like, do we learn to dip our fork in the salad dressing first, or do we feel uncomfortable about our bodies first? And I don't know, maybe I'm thinking about my own personal story, but I think I would became uncomfortable with my body first, and then maybe, started to look at ways to try and fix that, I suppose. And I think like online, there is this like sort of positive conversation. You certainly can make an Instagram feed or have influence of different types of bodies and different sizes of bodies online, which I do think is a positive step. But when I'm working with women one-on-one, they often haven't taken even some of those simple steps to try and start to expose themselves to different kinds of bodies. And so what they're comparing in their head is like this vision of their like teenage self, or what they imagined their teenage self needed to look like. And that is their body aspiration goals, which is hard for me to unpack with people in like 75 minutes, right? When I'm working with them one-on-one, I'm like, okay, I also need your cholesterol panel done. And we've got like 40 years worth of body image issues to unpack here. So one of the things I thought we would talk about, or what I'm curious about, is sort of how women can even start to take those steps around body image. Have always loved in the past the way that you've put this conversation. And so I wanted to kind of dive in on it a little deeper, but like, where do we even start?
Yeah. And it is really hard, because you're right. For most people, how they feel about their body drives their intentions around food and movement and how they treat their body. So I kind of describe this as how you feel in your body can feel very different than how you feel about your body. And a great way to illustrate this is you can be having a great day, and this still happens even when you have a healthy and flexible resilient relationship with your body. But you can be having a great day, you get dressed, you feel like $1,000,000, you're walking out the door, and then you catch a glimpse of yourself in a reflection, in a mirror, in a storefront, in your car window. And all of a sudden it feels like this out of body experience. And you start to think, oh my God, that's what I look like. Oh my God, I had no idea. And you start to judge how you feel about your body. And that becomes the driver of your self-esteem bus. And so I use this example all the time of, if your body image is driving your self-esteem bus, if you have a bad body image day, which happens all the time, even people who have, including me, who have, healthy, flexible, resilient senses of self, your bus is off the road. It has no chance. The whole day just kind of goes sideways. So what we want to try and work on with what we call body neutrality is trying to widen your self-image, trying to broaden your self-image and your sense of self so that your body image is one part of us. It can never be gone. I don't think, unless you're a Buddhist monk, and maybe even then you can be completely separated from how you feel about your body. But now it becomes more like a bad hair day where you just throw a hat on, you tie it up, you leave the house and you go about your day, knowing that tomorrow's probably just going to be better because it's tomorrow. Instead of being completely derailed and kind of circling the drain of just feeling so bad about yourself that you feel like you have to do something, even if that something hasn't worked in the past, and even if that something isn't likely to work in the future.
I love the way that you put that. That's sort of like bad body day. It's funny. I was thinking about so many personal examples as you were talking there. And I'm happy to share them. I think it's kind of helpful from an audience perspective. Like, my body's changed a lot since I was an adult. Like, I've probably fluctuated, like, in total, if I go down to my lowest and leanest body weight up to my largest body size, is probably a 40 or 45 pound difference in those two things. And I stumbled across, not that long ago, I stumbled across pictures that I had taken when I was at my leanest. And it's interesting, the part of my body, I'm saying in air quotes, that I dislike that I disliked then, looks exactly the same as it does right now, or at least my perspective of it is exactly the same right now. And it was such an aha moment for me. It's you have been looking at that little pooch, the post 2 kids, probably diastasis, never went back to normal pooch for 13 years, Jordan, in every single picture that has ever been taken. And it didn't actually matter what my body weight was. And I could have fluctuated 40 pounds between, I still would look at that same spot on my body and still was unhappy with it, despite in all of those pictures. And it kind of made me think about this conversation, that how much better each of those days could have gone if I was just that's just your body, Jordan. You actually can't change it. So just put some leggings on and go out.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really great relatable example of how weight loss doesn't protect us from a negative self-image. Because we have all had that experience of looking at a picture from another time and thinking, why did I think there was anything wrong with my body then? I wish I could have that body now.
Yeah.
And even though if we actually sit with it, we realize, I actually had the same insecurities then as I do now, because body image really is an inside job. And we attach meaning and worth and value and expectations to what will happen when we have a positive body image. But I very much liken it to how we talk to people about depression. If somebody has depression or, is prone to it, we would never tell them that the expectation is to be happy 100% of the time. We would tell them the expectation is to have more good days and bad days, to have the tools and support and resiliency when you are having bad days. But the goal is really just to be able to kind of sit comfortably in the middle, right? And that's the same with our body image. There are still days when I put on clothes and I think, well, I don't like how that looks. And I just change. I just change, end of story. I don't all of a sudden.
This is revolutionary. You just change.
I know. And I kind of forget that it is actually. But, so often people will say, oh, well, I just made myself wear it all day, even though I was uncomfortable, because I thought that would motivate me. But I don't know about you, but being in uncomfortable clothing is pretty much like the worst thing ever, because if you are wearing something that's digging into your stomach, you're going to think about your stomach all day, right? You're never going to have like a moment of freedom from that. So much of the work around body neutrality is, trying to remind people that we are so much more than our bodies, to ourselves, to the people around us, to people who love us, the people we work with. We are not just a body. Now, yes, there are privileges. I think that some people, and I would consider myself one of those people because, I consider myself in a mid-sized body. So I have not personally experienced, some of the bias and stigma that larger bodies have. And there's some realities of living in a smaller or mid-sized body that do make life easier. So I don't want to minimize that for anybody who is saying, hey, because I totally, totally have empathy for that. But I think that we sometimes, forget just how much or how little our bodies actually play, or how little other people's bodies play into our opinions of them. When I think of the people that I love and like and respect, and when I will remember when they're gone, it's really not about their body, right? Like, not to be like morbid, but like Jordan, when your day has come, I'm not going to be like, oh, wow, Jordan was a size, whatever. Not that I know your size. I'm going to think of like the amazing accomplishments you had in your life that have absolutely nothing to do with your body. And I think that remembering that that's generally how well-adjusted adults judge other adults, but that's also how other people are looking at us. They're not looking at us, judging us primarily on our body. So
And
sometimes I think that perspective helps.
it does help. And it actually brings up what my second question was going to be anyways, is like, how important is it that the people that you surround yourself are also on a similar journey to you? Because it's funny. I was thinking, like, as we hopped on this, and there is no video of today's podcast, which is very unfortunate that none of you get to see the situation that I'm in as we record this. But I have like a massive pimple on my chin that I knew would actually heal faster if I didn't like cover it up or do anything with it today. So I'm just letting her be her wild and free self. I am in my pajamas with my hair in a top knot because I've just come off a really big weekend. And nothing about like me getting ready for this podcast was mostly about how happy I was to see you, Jen. Not that I thought even for a moment that I needed to like, cake some makeup onto this pimple so that I could look presentable for you, because I knew you wouldn't care. I felt like it was very safe. I felt like I could just show up as my authentic self in my terrible t-shirt and it wouldn't matter. But that's something that I feel very privileged to have, right? I think that there's been lots of years in my life when I like wouldn't even leave my bedroom without putting makeup on my skin, or, checking out to make sure that my outfit looked good, because the moment I felt like I left my house, I felt like I was being judged, whether that was real or not. But just makes me think, like, how important is it for people to be cultivating a community of like-minded people?
Oh, yeah. Well, and first, I didn't even notice the pimple. So that just kind of illustrates my point. Yeah, no, I see it now. But I definitely did not even notice it. So I think it illustrates both of our points, right? That we feel really exposed, or that we feel like our, what we perceive to be flaws are exposed, but that most people don't notice them. But I think it is important that we recognize that there's an element of being human that will always care what other people think. So I would never set the goal for myself to not care what people think. But I would say that I set the goal, and what I tell people is that you want to have that be such a small slice of your self-image pie that whether that piece is there or not doesn't really influence the pie itself. So, and I think that you get there by showing up in the way that you want to show up, and realizing that your body is not a barrier to that. Even if you think it is, like most of the time, if you just do the thing that you want to do in the body that you have, it's fine. It's great. It's wonderful. May not be perfect, but that's okay too. But there's so much to be said for, the people that we spend our time with. And sometimes we can change this. Sometimes we can't. And I work with a lot of people who are in relationships or have family members who are still very, very entrenched in dieting and diet culture, and trying to diet and exercise their way into a body that they love. And that is, I think, a really challenging thing when you live with people because you can't kick them out always. But I think that when it comes to online, which is the reality is that that's where a lot of us spend our free time, it is so important to curate your feed so that the what you're trying to build, body resiliency, body neutrality, just a more flexible and forgiving sense of self, is also being reflected back to you. Because I've seen estimates that only about 5% of what we see in the media reflects the diversity of body shapes and sizes, which I would believe actually.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you think of like 5% of what makes it to the magazine covers and what makes it to all of the, Insta-worthy pictures and Photoshop, that doesn't reflect the diversity of bodies and shapes that are normal and healthy and really reflect, I think, what we see in our day to day. You realize that it is out there, but you do have to look for it. And, using, if you're on Instagram or any social media and looking for those hashtags, body neutrality, body confidence, body acceptance is a great way to start. They can be used and abused, of course, but it's a great place to start.
Yeah, those are great points. And I think, I've even noticed in myself that some of my automatic thoughts around my body or around other bodies that I see online are not the same that they used to be 15 years ago, which I think is positive, right? And there is some evidence for that too, right? Where if the more exposure that we have to diversity, the better our brain is at actually normalizing all of those pieces. And so if you're thinking about, your Instagram feed or whatever, and that doesn't make sense to you, if I get rid of these, CrossFit athletes or these whoever in my feed and replace them with other people's bodies, I'm still going to want to have an 8-pack. You actually don't. Like, the evidence actually suggests that you'll stop caring about it if you stop seeing it as much as you are right now, which I find so fascinating.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a great example of why representation matters, right? It doesn't matter what the minority is. Not the minority as an actual, but as in represented in whatever, media you're looking at. Seeing representation of yourself or people around you that is different than the status quo absolutely broadens our definition of normal and expected. And I think helps us to kind of just realize that so much of our body size and shape actually isn't under our control. And I say this all the time too, that, twin studies tell us that it's about 60 to 70% of our body size and shape is genetic, meaning the percentage of body fat that our body likes to default to, the type of muscle fibers, the percentage of, slow twitch versus fast twitch, just like our hair color and eye color and whether or not we have dimples or freckles is genetic, whether I have hips and the size of my breasts and whether I have a hip dip is also likely genetic. So often the things that we're trying to achieve through diet and exercise are never achievable through diet and exercise because they're not related to food.
I actually had to look up what a hip dip was this week because I didn't know.
Did we see the same reel? Because I actually had to check that out too.
Yeah, maybe. I saw it on someone else's Instagram and I was like, I'm not exactly clear what this even is. I feel like I have it and I don't know what it is, but I had to Google what a hip dip actually is this week.
I did too, because I'd heard it before. We must have seen the same reel probably. And I was like, wait a minute, I've heard that. I should check out what that is. But yeah, again, likely genetic, right? So those are the pieces I think sometimes that's freeing. If somebody has been, spending their life trying to get into a certain size or shape because either they wanted to, felt like they had to, thought that they would feel better about themselves, but are able to have the flexibility to see okay, there may be some parts that are changeable, but most maybe aren't. I think that it really opens up a whole other world to approach that relationship with food that really is more in line with, okay, I want to eat so I can feel well. I want to eat to have energy. I want to eat to support my health. But maybe whether or not I have a bun with my burger isn't going to be the game changer in whether my pants fit the way that I want them to.
It is. I do think it's freeing. Although I think for it to be freeing, we have to get to, or we'll probably have to constantly reassess because we get so much messaging that you could change it if you just tried harder. Right. And so
Mhm.
I find that like and I don't know where I'm going with this. So I'm just going to go on a slight tangent rant, but so I'm trying to think of a good example. Like I did my genetic testing, like with one of those
Yeah.
companies, partly just for like shits and giggles. I wanted to see what kind of reporting came back, if I liked the interface online, like the way they reported it or whatever. And I did it when I was like 38 or something like that, which was 2 years ago. And it came back and it was like, oh, you are hella slow when you run. You should only lift weights, and your body's shape and size is going to be larger or heavier than the average person of your height. And there was something else it said. And I was like, well, no shit. Like I know that now, but it took me like a whole 38 years to figure out that I am not going to be an endurance athlete, that I should lift one rep heavy once, and that I sit heavier than the average 5'4" woman. But then there has been like all those years, and even still now, you kind of go, but like, could I change it? Right? Like, if I just tried hard enough, could I be a runner or could I be a fast runner? When the answer is probably no, to be honest.
Yeah.
But there is that, like, even when you get that level of feedback, there's still that messaging that, like, but only if you found the right solution, you could probably overcome your genetics.
So weight is not a behavior is one of my favorite sayings,
I love that.
right? Yeah, weight is not a behavior. And so the really interesting thing, again, that I think is actually freeing for people is that when we pursue intentional weight loss through restriction, which is what every diet is, right? So, like, it's what it is. Let's call it out. Your brain becomes more interested in food. Like your appetite increases, even for things that maybe you don't actually like, which anyone who's been on a diet knows that, like, oh my God, that whole sleeve of rice cakes looks so delicious right now.
I was going to say
Right?
rice cakes too. It's funny.
See? Programming. So, but we become more interested in food. There's all of the research looking at metabolic adaptation, meaning that our metabolism adapts to having less reliable access to food, and therefore everything slows down. And then the research around weight cycling tells us that maybe when we do have reliable access to food again, meaning when we're off the diet, that our body's a little bit more efficient at storing it to prepare for the next time that it doesn't have reliable access to food. So even when we think that we're making a very conscious choice with the thinking part of our brain about food, weight is not a behavior. And so if you aren't eating in a way that feels easy and safe and, overall kind of nourishing in all the ways, not just nutritious, it's going to be really hard for you to feel like you're eating intuitively, because your brain is going to be like, ooh, but that looks really good because yesterday we were a little too hungry. So let's have a little more of that. And every time that you try and go back to restriction, it gets harder and harder and harder, which is kind of where I think so many of the people in midlife land, kind of on my doorstep, virtually, of course, is that I'm so uncomfortable in my body and I know I need to do something, but I just mentally can't. What do I do now? And that's where you've got to close all the browser tabs, just let the house crumble, and let's just build you back up. And let's kind of try and erase. Let's do like a Control-Alt-Delete on all of your programming and all the things that, you really believed were true. Like just today, I had to come out in defense of oatmeal again, because there's so much misinformation about oatmeal. But I've had people who loved oatmeal and haven't touched it in 20 years since the first time low carb was popular, only to be completely shocked that not only is it quote unquote good for them, but it's a super satisfying, delicious breakfast that makes like breakfast fun again. So this is where like it's the Control-Alt-Delete. You really have to undiet everything that you think is true, and let's re-examine it with facts and evidence of 2022. Is it actually true? Is it always true? Is it sometimes true? Or is it never true? And let's, adjust your actions based on that.
So we don't restore our tabs when the browser comes back up and it's like, you force quit this. Do you need to restore all your tabs?
No, I do not.
Unless you're me, because you have 3 different windows and 75 tabs in each of them, and you know where everything is. I'm just kidding. Let's talk a little bit about just consistency, because you mentioned there that like the cycling and the the on, off, up, down, yes, no, restriction, binge. I'll go that far.
Yeah.
Like, how important is consistency with this? Like, and just like, and I think what I mean by consistency is just like continuously showing up for yourself, for the plan, for the intention. Like, how important is that to that sort of success that we want to have for women with that undieting and body positivity or body neutrality? That's probably the better term.
Yeah. Well, and I think that consistency carries a little bit of diet culture baggage with it, right? And so I'm always really careful with language. Like in my membership, we call it like a gentle nutrition adventure. We don't call it a gentle nutrition challenge because people have like PTSD from like challenges, right?
Challenges, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that when we talk about consistency, I don't think that I would use that word in the work that I do with people, but I know what you're getting at. And so I think what happens is that when people start this undieting journey, it sometimes does have the novelty of a new diet and a new plan. It's like, ooh, this is something new. Yes, I'm super excited about this. But it's actually quite easy for people to fall into that diet mentality, even with intuitive eating, where they're looking for the rules, they're looking for the on off, they're not kind of really committing to the process, which is what I say is like the most important thing. If you commit to the outcome, then you have your blinders on to everything that's happening on the sidelines. And that's actually where the work is happening. And it's that getting through that messy middle without feeling like you have to like start over at go again every time. So I think consistency just means committing to the process, committing that, if you have only ever known following a diet, following a plan, tracking your food all the time, whatever it is, and all of a sudden you're learning to rely on your intuition and your body's hunger and fullness cues, which you may be listening to for the first time ever. There's a whole lot of learning there, and it's not going to be consistent. I get emails all the time from people like, I didn't know if I was hungry or not, but I wanted to eat, or how do I know if I'm full, or how do I know if I've had enough? So I think the consistency is just stay committed to the process, stay committed to that. There's so much learning to be done in the undieting that it will become intuitive, but it's never going to be perfect. And that's never the goal either. It's meant to be like flexible and forgiving. So kind of like a bowling lane, right? You've got your gutters on either side, but you have a pretty wide path that will get you to where you want to go with lots of different ways to kind of knock all the pins down. But that you don't want to be thinking about like getting a strike every single time, because that's not real life eating.
Yeah, I like that you reframe that for us, because I think when I said the word consistency and then you started talking, I was like, oh, but maybe actually what I mean is like trying, like, because I think consistency too, like that kind of gives off the air that you actually are doing something consistently versus just trying consistently. Because some of the challenges that I see when I'm working with women on these kinds of concepts is that as soon as it gets a little uncomfortable, or as soon as they have to go home for the holidays and now they're with all of those triggering people or triggering environments, or they eat like a 10-year-old when they go back to their parents, which is not all bad, but that then they feel like that sense of failure that's so common in diet culture, that you're doing it wrong, that they can't, and they don't have the staying power, like in the discomfort. Like, how do you coach people through that like pile of shit they have to get through actually to come out the other side?
Oh, yeah. And that's a great question that doesn't have an easy answer, obviously. One, I think, is that we become very attached to how we present ourselves to the world and to others, because it gives us a false sense of being able to control other people's opinions of us. So when we can, realize that how we show up in the world in the way that actually matters to the people that love us and that we love and want to spend time with. And at the end of the day, who do you want at your funeral is kind of how I phrase it in my coaching. What do you need to show up for them, or how can you show up for them in a way that isn't giving away the part of you that they love? Because if I have to, do my makeup and do my hair and show up in this certain way and wear heels and all that kind of stuff, that's not me. right? So I think so much of sometimes what we are focused on is trying to please other people. And so if we can kind of bring it back and say that, I'm the most important person in this relationship with me. And I will feel more confident if I'm wearing clothes that fit. I will feel more confident if I'm wearing clothes that suit my personal style, that aren't about meeting other people's expectations. And so really focusing on what can you do that is helping you to feel better in your body versus about your body is probably kind of the best place to start, because I think that that's a delineation that anybody who has had body image issues can relate to. And so always just bringing it back to what can you do to feel good in your body, which is going to come down to showing your body respect, showing your body kindness, building body trust, trusting that you're feeding it and nourishing it in a way that it needs to feel good, not necessarily just look good, which might be the framework that most people have made decisions about food with for however many years. Yeah, not an easy answer, but definitely a big part of the work.
I like your answer. And it's made me think, about there's probably some people listening or some women listening, and they can't even imagine going out with their girlfriends with that mindset. Right. And makes me think of a couple things. Like, one, maybe we need a new circle. But two, maybe you're the one that will be the bravest one in your circle to be that person, right? Like, I think we can influence the women around us and give them permission to show up without makeup on their pimple or whatever. If we can show up in that space, loving and accepting and supporting them in all of their glory, like, I think we have to remember that we also are projecting some of those things on the people that come, like, that hang out with us. And if we want that circle to feel different, we probably have to show up different, like on two fronts. One, the way we show up for ourselves, but also the way that we create and hold space for our girlfriends.
Yeah, be the change, right? I want to share this lovely, lovely, lovely story that someone just shared with me a couple of weeks ago. So someone that I'm working with was flying out to meet several girlfriends that she had not seen in almost 5 years for a bunch of different reasons, of course, the pandemic being one of them. And so much of what we were talking about beforehand was around, she was feeling really nervous about showing up, hadn't seen these people in person, had only seen each other over Zoom, was really feeling like so vulnerable. And so everybody showed up like in their best version of themselves, all dressed to the nines and everything. And she said about, 2 glasses of wine in, everybody just started being real and talking about, how scared they were about showing up this way. And she said the rest of the weekend was like pajamas and no makeup. And yeah, I think we need to show up for others the way that we want to show up for ourselves, because we're not alone. Like, this is an issue for a reason. And to kind of bring it back to the research for women in perimenopause, especially, there's another peak of body dissatisfaction. So we know that body dysmorphia and body image dissatisfaction starts its first peak around puberty. Seems like there's another peak that's happening in perimenopause, likely because of those hormone changes that aren't unlike puberty, right? And so, this is a time in life when perimenopause and hormone changes are throwing us for a loop in every possible way. And we also have that really normal, expected body change of midlife, where most women become softer and rounder and experience a redistribution of assets. And so everybody's feeling the way you're feeling. Even if you don't see changes in them, they're probably feeling it. Even if they've never, expressed it to you, pretty much everybody I talk to, even strangers, as soon as they hear what I do, they're like, so what about, and they want to know immediately, like, is it normal that my body's changing? Is it normal that I've gained weight even though I haven't done anything differently? Yeah, it is normal. And you can spend time and money and life fighting it tooth and nail, or you can let it be a small sliver of who you are and work on everything else that matters more, including your health, including nutrition, which is the biggest misconception about intuitive eating and undieting, is that you no longer care about nutrition. And it's completely the opposite. It's that you just make it matter. And, you start to redefine those relationships with food, like wanting protein because it helps you to feel full and build muscle and feel, kind of strong and satisfied versus I need to do this because this is what every influencer has told me I need to have at every meal, which is joyless.
That is joyless. I
Yeah.
know. Um, so as we kind of wrap up the conversation today, I would love to give our listeners some take-home thoughts. I know when I'm chatting about these pieces with women, one of my first suggestions for them around goal setting, because I think again, it's that same idea that people feel like if we're giving up, right? If we're not going to have body goals, then we're just giving up on life, and that's not true at all. Is I usually want women to have some kind of performance-based goal with their body. So whether that's walking faster than they did, walking and being less winded, walking and doing the circuit reverse because the hills are worse if you go that way, or having some kind of performance-based goal around energy, mood, sleep, because we do like to feel like we're on a journey. And I think it's helpful to put one foot in front of the other if we feel like there is some purpose towards those actions.
Yeah.
And so that's usually one of my goals, and I'll put it in often that first interaction I have with women is around creating some kind of performance-based goal with their body so that they can feel connected to what they're doing and make the nutrition feel like it's moving towards something that's different than aesthetics. But what do you suggest? Like, how do you get people to take like that first step, and what's a good way for them to get started?
Yeah. So what you're talking about is kind of what we call gentle nutrition, which is, I always describe like once we have gotten people out of the diet mentality, once we have broken that, what was like a chain link connection with food and what their body looks like, and we've learned to pay attention and respond to hunger and fullness cues, then we kind of circle back to gentle nutrition, which is the intention part of, okay, I'm 45, almost 46. Yes, I put a fair amount of intention into getting protein at most meals and a nice dose of it, but I don't sacrifice satisfaction. I do it because I do feel better. I do it because when I am lifting weights, my recovery is faster. Like I do it for all those reasons. But it's a fine line, because if you haven't really kind of found your stride with intuitive eating, that can very quickly feel diety. It can very quickly feel like, oh, so I have to count and track and measure again to make sure I'm getting 25 grams of protein at every meal. And so I think that goals are awesome. And I think that even just having a goal of having a flexible relationship with food, but also I'm a big fan of habit trackers, just simple habit trackers that you print and put on your fridge, your bathroom door, whatever it is, so that you can give yourself credit for showing up. Because you're right. We do like to feel like, we're often goal-driven people. Not everyone, but most of us at some point have had that experience of liking the challenge of a goal. But if we can, as long as we can make sure that that goal isn't tied to what our body looks like, I think it feels more sustainable. It feels more attainable. And so joyful movement being part of intuitive eating as well. And I often encourage people the same thing. Like, I told someone the other couple of weeks ago, give yourself credit just for putting your shoes on and leaving the house, because that was progress for them. Instead of the 20 minutes a day minimum that she had been told by a trainer, which felt completely unattainable to her. She hadn't had regular movement as part of her life for quite a while. So I think that goals need to be achievable. I'm not going to use the SMART acronym, but they really need to be in line with what you want to do and be able to progress. And with food, that sometimes really needs to be baby steps. So if you have only known tracking and measuring and counting, maybe your goal is just not to track. Right? Sometimes that's actually a big challenge for people to go 30 days without tracking their food. But there's so much learning in there. Like, how did that feel? How did you feel when you had one breakfast versus another? Which were you excited to have the next day? Which did you not want to ever have again? So I think the goals can be more around learning to trust your body instead of telling it what it should do or telling it what it needs, which is where so many people are coming out of that diet culture mentality.
I thought you were going to say, how did you feel when you had one breakfast or two? And I was like, two breakfasts, always two breakfasts, please. Never going to say no to two breakfasts.
I'm a big breakfast fan. It's my favorite meal of the day.
It's my favorite meals of the day. Yep. Love breakfasts. I love your words, Jen, and I'm a big words person. I feel like they really matter to me. The way that we say things out loud, the way we say things to ourselves in our head, I think make a tremendous difference. And I truly believe and maybe this is my bias because I'm a words person, that I feel like even if words is not someone's love language, the words that they choose to describe themselves, their goals, their experiences in their head do dictate the way that they feel. And so
Absolutely.
I'm always in favor of us getting in alignment with words that better describe what we're actually moving towards. I like the word adventure. I like the words joyful. I like the words intentional. These, I don't think most people have ever thought about their body and their food with those words in mind. And what if we went into every meal with this, what is my intention here? To feel happy and loved and connection and full and energetic, versus the way that we're, typically doing the mental math on whether or not we deserve to have what's in front of us. I think big things can happen for women if that was the way they approached their body and their food.
Yeah, I call that food Tetris. So when you're playing food Tetris in your head, and it's not a good place to be, because you never feel confident that you're actually going to win this game, right? It's always a little bit of, well, I'm going to see if I can shimmy that in or take that out. But you're right, words do matter. And I think that for anybody who is listening and who is thinking, there's no way, that all sounds great, but the only way that I'm going to feel good about my body is if I can lose X amount of pounds or whatever. Again, just have a look around. There are so many people who also felt that way, who have changed and who have really come out the other side. It's not just me, who have, realized that, okay, I can be happy and healthy and strong and fit and living my best life, even if I don't fit into my wedding dress anymore. So yeah, and life is, diet culture is a life thief because it can become so all encompassing. It can become your identity. It can become everything that you do. And especially with social media, where you can really, people follow hashtags and they find their tribe and they just kind of stay there. You really can end up in almost like an echo chamber and not realize how much more of life is on the outside of that.
Jen, how can our listeners find you?
Best place is always going to be on Instagram because I hang out there too much, but I have fun, at menopause.nutritionist, and also menopausenutritionist.ca, which has info about the membership and my programs.
And I highly recommend that you hang out with Jen on Instagram. She's one of my favorite Instagram follows. So much good information, very relatable content. And it fills your feed with these good questions for you to ask yourself about what your relationship is with yourself, with movement, with food. So I highly recommend that you follow her, and we'll put the links to that and Jen's programs in the show notes. And so if you need a quick reference, you can hop over to those show notes and link directly to it. Thanks so much, friend. I always love our chats. We are chipping away at this diet culture every time we get behind the mic together.
Yes. Thanks so much, Jordan. Maybe one day we'll get to do this in person.
I hope so. Now that I have a passport and can actually leave the country, we're going to make this possible one day.
Awesome.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.